Welcome. My name is Miriam Abramovich, and I'm the CEO of the Buffalo Jewish Federation. And I'm so happy to have all of you here with us tonight. I think your presence signifies something really important, and that is that the safety and security of Jewish Buffalo is a responsibility that we all share. Security has been one of Federation's most significant areas of investment for the past 6 years. Through Secure Jewish Buffalo, which is the program that we manage, we've built a coordinated, community-wide approach to safety. We support Jewish institutions with assessments and emergency preparedness planning. We offer a wide range of trainings. We arrange off-duty law enforcement coverage for agencies and for all Jewish gatherings. And all along, we are working to strengthen the relationships that keep our community connected to trusted partners, some of whom are here this evening. Alongside all of the visible work that we do to secure the community is the constant and often unseen effort of our Federation team. Under the leadership of our Senior Director of Community Security, Craig Macy, and before him, Susan Damari, this has meant hundreds of hours spent coordinating with law enforcement partners to review, assess, and address potential threats, to respond to concerning communications, and bring together information from across agencies and Jewish security colleagues nationwide to form a clear picture of every situation that we're presented with. The scope and pace of this work are considerable, but they're all in service of our commitment to keeping Jewish Buffalo informed and protected. And a critical part of that commitment is expanding opportunities for community learning, sessions like tonight that offer clarity about the systems that shape our safety infrastructure. So very grateful to all of you for being here tonight and being open to the learning. And I'm going to turn everything over to Craig to introduce our guest.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody coming out to this event tonight. I would also like to thank Patty from the JCC, Ginny from the Federation, Mandy from the Federation for helping to get everything squared away for this evening. Your attendance, as Miriam said, is very important on this topic. This topic is meant to, create more knowledge on the subject that we're going to be talking about because it continuously comes up, right? So then I would like to thank, obviously, Danielle, but Mike Kane, the district attorney, for allowing this training to happen and facilitate it. Once this came up once or twice since I've been here in September, we reached out and we were able to have him provide Danielle, who is a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and hopefully everybody learns a little bit more when you see things, what is and what isn't a hate crime. So as far as Secure Jewish Buffalo, as Miriam said, it is a program that falls under the Buffalo Jewish Federation. We are aiming to always strengthen our relationships within the community, whether it's law enforcement, other partners that are in security, community members, by providing trainings like this, whether it's to this the actual community itself or professional help or professional employees that work at the federations or the different JCCs or the different synagogues and temples. So we're always out there trying to increase preparedness and knowledge on everything that's going on in the world to the greater community, right? So my previous job, I was the chief of detectives for the Buffalo Police Department, and this topic would come up every so often, whether it was from a victim, a community member, possibly media. Hey, this is a case that involves a protected class, a religious site. Why is this a hate crime? Why is this not a hate crime? And then again, as I was saying, being here for couple months, it came up a couple other times. So being able to recognize that this has came up multiple times, and with the support of Miriam in the DA's office, being able to provide that, hopefully there's some clarity. So I would like to thank Danielle for coming and introduce her. Danielle's been with the District Attorney's Office for 15 years. She's worked in a wide range of capacities there, whether it was city court, the juvenile bureau, raise the age. There was community outreach that she was in charge of, and now she is the chief of felony trials. So thank you for your time and coming out.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm going to try to stay away from the microphone, so if I move and you can't hear me, just wave me down and I'll go back to the microphone. As Craig said, I have been with the District Attorney's Office for 15 years. I started my career in New York City Corporation Counsel prosecuting juvenile delinquents. Those are kids between the ages of 7 and 15 that have committed very violent felony offenses in Queens. Then I had the pleasure to come home and work at the District Attorney's Office, where, as Craig said, I've had a variety of different experiences with the DA's office, a significant amount of time working with community and forming programs at the District Attorney's Office, in addition to being a trial attorney. Tonight, what I'd like to do, before we jump right into hate crimes in New York State, I want to give a little bit of an overview of the District Attorney's Office, how we go about prosecuting cases. I have found in my experience when talking to community groups that kind of helps to form the conversation. And then we're going to move into hate crimes in New York State. And one of our office members is here today, Jessica Kent, and she is a proud member of the JCC. She is with our Victim Witness Bureau, and I will be talking about that tonight as well. So we'll be heavy on the law around hate crimes in New York State, but I think it helps to educate everybody with respect to what the law is and what the demands of the law are when a hate crime is in fact charged. I have to put this up because they tell me. So again, our focus of our conversation is first going to be the structure of the District Attorney's Office, and then we're going to move on to hate crimes. So what do? The District Attorney's Office, Mike Hain is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer in Erie County. So we are responsible for the just prosecution of nearly every crime in Erie County. Annually, we have about 35,000 cases. We have over 100 attorneys in our office, 14 investigators that are all former and retired police officers, as well as 64 support staff. We have approximately 60 different courts that our attorneys go to in Erie County. Every crime starts off in the local jurisdiction. If it is a misdemeanor, which is the lowest level of offense, or a felony, it's going to start in the local jurisdiction where it occurred. So for instance, if a robbery was committed in Amherst, when a person is arrested, they are first going to be arraigned, for the most part, 90% of the time, in Amherst Town Court. Then they are subject to what is called a felony hearing 5 days after their arrest. And if the court hears the testimony and determines that there is reasonable cause that a felony was committed, that case is then divested to a superior court. That superior court are your Supreme and your county courts. When a matter is divested, and that is only felonies, it has to be presented to the grand jury. And a grand jury is a secret proceeding of approximately 23 community members that listen to the facts of a case and determine if a felony has been committed. Not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but again, reasonable cause. Then a case starts all over again in county or Supreme Court. That person would be arraigned on what the grand jury determined to be the charges against them. And then we start through the trial process. Pre-trial motions where we exchange evidence. There's suppression hearings. Suppression hearings is when a defense attorney is asking the court potentially to suppress evidence, such as statements made by the defendant, physical evidence. And once those legal issues are determined, we then will have a trial, or that person can plead guilty or be held accountable without a trial. That is the accused's right, is to have a trial. If it is not a felony, if it is a misdemeanor or a violation, that remains in the local court. The local court, for instance, here would be Amherst. So if you were charged with a driving while impaired or intoxicated, petty larceny, these lower level misdemeanor offenses would remain in the lower court. Does that make sense? Okay. So, circling back, our ADAs, the vast majority of them right now, I think we have about 13 in the justice courts. Those are our mid-level attorneys that are handling misdemeanors in our justice courts. Amherst, Cheektowaga, Williamsville, City of Buffalo. Then we have felony assistants. That's who I have the pleasure of supervising, is ADAs that are now in felony trials, and they are handling general felonies. We also work very closely with law enforcement on cases in advance of arrest to advise them with legal guidance. Namely, that's going to happen in our most serious offenses, such as sex offenses, murders. Our most senior attorneys work with law enforcement in advance of someone's arrest and in their investigation. As I indicated, we present matters to the grand jury, then trials, and of course we have an appeals bureau. An appeals bureau is, those are the attorneys that are securing the convictions that we have. They're the really, really smart ones in the office. So we have multiple divisions at the DA's office. We have felony trials, which are general felonies: burglaries, assaults, robberies. A robbery is a forcible taking. A burglary is when someone comes into your home and commits a crime therein. Major crimes, those are all our gun-related offenses. Generally, that is when an individual has been shot but hasn't died. Special victims is our sexual assault, child abuse cases, domestic violence. We have vehicular crime unit. Those are for cases involving individuals that are impaired or intoxicated by drugs, with priors, or God forbid someone has lost their life. Narcotics. Our narcotics is precisely what it is, but our focus at the district attorney's office is not on those that are suffering from a substance abuse addiction, but to prosecute those that are dealing drugs. That is our focus. Animal cruelty unit, and then special investigations and public integrity. That is generally large-scale financial crimes, as well as crimes against the elderly and public corruption. Homicide unit. And finally, we also have a raise the age unit. That is juvenile crime, juveniles that are accused of very violent offenses. I was the chief of that unit for many, many years. Well, what felt like many years. But it's also my, to be honest, my passion and my interest when it comes to young people that have been entangled in the criminal justice system. The next is we have community outreach, and that is something that Mr. Macy and I have worked many years together with. Our community outreach, really the goal of community outreach is events like this, where we get to educate our community members about the district attorney's office, the law, also building relationships and making stronger relationships between law enforcement and community. Because in most crimes, most offenses, it is very challenging in today's world to get victims of crimes, especially violent gun violence, to cooperate with law enforcement and the district attorney's office. That's just the reality. There's significant consequences to those that identify individuals that have perpetrated crimes, that it has consequences to their community, to their families, and we have made a concentrated effort to not only work with our youth, but community to build trust so that we can hold people accountable in an effort to prevent crime. Children have been that have been entangled in the criminal justice system. We have created programs going into schools and dealing with cyberbullying. We've created a gun violence panel that for years was a combination of those that have themselves been involved in gangs, speaking to the youth about their own experiences, as well as the perspective of mothers that have lost their children from gun violence, as well as law enforcement, and talking to young people about the consequences of their choices and trying to redirect those conversations and take violence and minimize it as we can amongst our youth. And the next unit that I'd like to talk about is the one that Jessica is a part of, and that is our Victim Witness Assistance Bureau. The criminal justice system is challenging to be a part of, especially when you are a victim of a crime. And in order for us to make the process easier on victims of crimes or a loved one who's lost their family member or a child that has been the victim of crime, we have multiple social workers like Jessica that accompany our victims and their families to court, that work with the attorneys to connect them with services. It is not only traumatizing to be the victim of a crime, but it is then traumatizing to have to tell your story not once, not twice, but sometimes multiple times in the front of a grand jury, then in trial when you have to face your accuser. And to have their expertise in trauma-informed care helps us because we are in the courtroom trying to do our best to hold people accountable, and sometimes we don't have the latitude to explain every single detail, and that's where we lean on our Victim Witness Bureau. It was critical. I can't talk too much about the top shooting, but I can tell you that I was heavily involved in our community efforts post-tragedy, and I worked day in and day out with the FBI Victim Witness Bureau as well as our own to assist the families and the nearly 100 individuals that were in the store at the time of the crime in the surrounding area that were impacted, in addition to the 10 families and the 3 individuals that were shot and survived. And we have a specialized homicide and witness protection case manager who is trained in the nuances of what affects the victims of homicides and protecting them. So now, it's okay, we did that in like 12 minutes. Any questions about the structure of the DA's office? Okay, then I guess that's a good sign. Now let's talk about hate crimes. So if we go back, there's always been statutes or law, penal law, in New York State that criminalizes conduct that is directed to or motivated by hate. In 2000, there was a specific statute that was enacted. And I'm going to read the law to you. It's specifically Penal Law 485.05 Subdivision 1. There will be a test at the end. And so what that says in Penal Law Section 485.05 is crime motivated in whole or in part. That little phrase, in whole or in part, has significant meaning that we'll talk about in a minute. By the perpetrator's belief or perception that a person belongs to a particular group, or by a perpetrator's beliefs or perceptions regarding a particular group. Our legislators do not make these things easy. They like words. You would think they got paid by the word. So why do we do this? What is the legislative intent? Well, of course, there is significant harm to a victim of a hate crime, but it also has a significant impact on community. And that leads to community unrest. It leads to copycat crimes and retaliation. So these are very sensitive crimes that have to be managed from a law enforcement perspective carefully. By enacting these specific 48505, what the legislator has said is if you engage in this type of conduct and you are found guilty, you are now going to have enhanced penalties for a hate crime. The easiest way, statistics, I forgot I put this in here. The FBI, and I think they might be here, and they can obviously tell us better than I can. The last report was in 2015, and at that time there was approximately 5,850 reported hate crime incidents. Now this was 10 years ago, but 2015 in New York State we had 503 incidents. That's per the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services. Now that number, right, seems really low. Well, I think what that says is that there is underreporting of hate crime, because those that are a victim of a hate crime or a community have reservation because they understand the collateral consequences of reporting it, and if that could bring on even more concern. So at least that's what I read. Now back to what the law is. The easiest way to define a hate crime is there are specified crimes. So the legislator gave about 40 crimes that said these are crimes that if they are motivated by hate, it is going to increase the penalties. So a specific crime plus hate. The elements, any offense that we have to prove as prosecutors, there's elements of an offense. An easy example, criminal possession of a weapon, okay? Criminal possession of a weapon, the law says that you have to knowingly possess a loaded and operable firearm. That's all I have to prove. Those elements beyond a reasonable doubt, that someone knowingly, and the law has a specific legal definition of knowingly, loaded, and possessed. I don't have to prove why that person possessed that gun. I don't have to prove how long. I just have to prove those specific elements beyond a reasonable doubt. So now applying that to a hate crime. What the statute reads is that a person intentionally selects a person against whom the offense is committed or intended to be committed. So an example, that provision of the law is focused and targeted on a hate crime that targets a person. The next part of the law is, or intentionally commits the act or acts constituting the offense. An example of that would be a property crime. So the target is neither a particular person, it could be, for instance, a synagogue. Specified offenses. New York State has now said New York State has said these are the protected classes. So the accused, the defendant, selected a person in whole or substantial part, and we'll get to that again, because of a belief or perception regarding that person's race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender identity or expression, religion, religious practice, age 60 or older, disability, or sexual orientation. So our politicians have identified these as the protected classes for which a hate crime can be committed, and that person has to do so intentionally, that their conscious objective or purpose was to commit that specified offense against this person who is in a protected class. So what are those specific hate crime offenses? I didn't list all of them because it would be boring to look at, but I broke them down into categories. So assault. So for instance, I targeted a person, I intended to cause them physical injury, and I did so, and it was motivated by hate. So assault plus hate. Strangulation, manslaughter, stalking, sex offenses, robbery, and some of our acts of terrorism crimes, as well as burglary, criminal mischief, grand larceny. What is left out is endangering the welfare of a child. Endangering the welfare of a child is when, with the intent, when you are affecting a child's, the elements of course are escaping me now, but when you act in an injurious way against a child, unfortunately they did not identify that crime as a hate crime. Write your legislator. The legal definitions. Intent, again. So we would have to prove that this person's conscious objective or purpose was to commit this offense, excuse me, and to do so because it was motivated by hate. Disability also has a specific meaning in the law that we would have to prove if that was the protected class. So if someone assaulted someone because they were disabled and we could prove that they did that, that is the definition of disability we'd have to prove, as well as gender identity and expression. In 2024, the legislature expanded these definitions. One of the additional, this is where it gets a little tricky. So what the law says, and we know this from the way that judges have interpreted the hate crime statutes, is that the statute does not require any proof of animus or bias against a particular group. So I don't have to prove that this person has had a long history of disliking someone because of their race or their national origin. Rather, I have to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that he or she selected that person and committed those acts in part or substantial part because that person is a member of a protected class. It would be insufficient for us to, it's insufficient to establish that the defendant, the victim, or both race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender identity, or expression, or practice or age. So for instance, what the judge was trying to say in that particular case is, I don't have to prove that that person did it just because that person is of a protected class. I have to prove that they did it and they were motivated and that was the purpose behind their conduct. So they targeted the victim because of their protected class, not that they are in a protected class. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm sorry, that is a little hard to read. So how does a prosecutor, how are we able to prove that someone did something and they were motivated by hate? The examples that I want to cite for you today come from real life cases that were charged. And then I can't read it either. At 43 years old, I've decided today is the day I need readers. So give me a second. Okay, so for instance, if I had a glass of water and I picked up a glass of water and I drank it, could any of you tell me what I was thinking when I picked up that glass of water? Probably not. Was I thirsty? Was I nervous? Was I trying to stall? Who knows? Unless I tell you, or you can draw a reasonable inference from my actions, you don't really know what someone is thinking or why they did it unless they tell you. So those are things, as a prosecutor, when I'm evaluating a hate crime, what I'm going to look at. What did the person that is accused, the defendant, the perpetrator, say or do during the course of the offense? What were the words that they were using? Were they using racial epithets? That is one factor in determining whether or not I can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this person committed this crime and they were motivated by hate. So for instance, in a case in the Second Department, which is downstate in New York, the use of racial epithet is a viable inference that conduct is racially motivated. In that particular case, a police officer was striking a victim and accosted the victim for no apparent reason. So what the court looked at in that fact pattern was that a police officer targeted this individual for no reason And then when he struck her, he called her a racial epithet. So that conduct plus the use of that racial epithet together was sufficient to establish a hate crime. Another case, this was out of Albany. This is where the court said this was insufficient, prosecutor. You could not prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. And in fact, how the police charged this just on the paperwork was insufficient alone. In this particular case, and this is involving a young person, someone that is probably about 16 or 17, that individual was accused of punching someone in the face and calling the individual, the term that was used was faggot. And the court held there that that was insufficient to prove or to establish that the respondent was motivated to act because of the belief that the victim was a homosexual. So in that particular fact pattern, a court held it was insufficient. So as a prosecutor, I have to look at our facts and I have to weigh the case law and determine if we can prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. And sometimes the truth is, there is sufficient evidence to move forward, but we present it to a jury, and a jury of 12 people listen to the facts, listen to the law, and determine if we have met our burden beyond a reasonable doubt. Another example from the first department, and this was in 2006. In this case, the accused individual, approached two African-American men for, again, no apparent reason. So the court's going to look at what were the circumstances that led up to that interaction. And if there's no objective, credible reason for them to approach strangers, that is a fact that the court is going to consider. For no apparent reason, used racial epithets, threatened them with a box cutter, and then repeatedly shot at them. In that particular case, the court held that that was a hate crime. Another case from 2007, again, using the use of racial epithets was sufficient. A case from 2011, the defendant in this case demanded a Sikh victim to take off their turban, was taunting that person, and demanding to see that person's hair. That was held to be a hate crime. In a criminal mischief, a property crime, the use of anti-Semitic words and symbols in that case was sufficient to be able to show that this was motivated by hate. So every case has to be evaluated, if it's a hate crime, if it's a murder, if it's a robbery, by the facts, by the case law, and what the law demands of the people. So what we are looking at is what was that person's conduct leading up to and most certainly during the course of the commission of the crime to establish a hate crime. It is circumstantial evidence. It's looking at, there was an instance in 2014, again downstate, where a person intentionally entered a gay chat room to select their victim to rob them. So the prosecution was able to establish that that was the motivation behind the robbery. It wasn't just a forcible taking, which is a robbery. It was a forcible taking motivated by hate. That's what we have to establish. So looking at property crimes, for instance, there are many instances at churches, at synagogues, where crimes can be committed. And just because it occurs at that sensitive location, at a location where protected classes are, doesn't elevate it to a hate crime. One example that I found in the case law, this was a case that happened in the 4th Department, so it was in Rochester, Buffalo area. This individual attempted to burn down a synagogue, and that, in and of itself, was support of his guilt of a hate crime because he was targeting his intended victim's religion. Now, contrast that with a person who puts a Nazi symbol on a building for the purpose to fight against fascism. That may not be a hate crime. But if they put a Nazi symbol on a building because they were intended, because it was hate motivated, that could be considered a hate crime. So what are the sentencing implications if you are found guilty of a hate crime? Again, as a society, we have come together to say, if you committed offense and it is a hate crime, you're going to be held accountable. So for instance, if someone is charged with assault in the third degree as a hate crime, that is a Class A misdemeanor. So I intend to cause injury and I cause physical injury. If I do it because it was motivated by hate, it now is elevated one level to an E felony. So that person is now exposed to a potential of 1 1/3 to 3 years in state prison, or 2 to 4 years indeterminate in state prison, as opposed to potentially 1 year as a misdemeanor. So the collateral consequences to your liberty are significantly increased because we have come together as a society to say that it won't be accepted. So another aspect of the law is that we have offenses, aggravated harassment, that is not labeled a hate crime, but the hate crime elements are worked into the offense. And that is aggravated harassment in the first degree. So here again, this has to deal with damaging property, and it's very specific. When someone damages property for religious purposes, and they damage the premises, it has to exceed $50, which that's a good amount. Because sometimes with criminal mischief, we have a challenging time because it's in order for it to be a felony, it has to be a lot more money than $50. So, and the defendant did so with the intent to harass, annoy, threaten, or alarm that person. So this goes back to, we have to prove that that person's conscious objective or their purpose is to harass. So that was the example of a Nazi symbol. Was it being used to express anti-Semitic hatred, or was it to indicate that an entity is fascist? If that person is using the symbol to make a point that that is a fascist organization, that is not motivated by hate. But if they are doing it so as to because they are expressing anti-Semitic hatred, that is a hate crime. Does that make sense? So another example, if you go to a church, Catholic church or a synagogue, and you graffiti it, that does not mean that it is a hate crime. It means that you committed a criminal mischief. It just wasn't motivated by hate. Aggravated harassment in the first degree, I like to call this a hate crime plus harassment. Harassment in the second degree is when I make inappropriate contact with you, but I do not cause physical injury. So for instance, it is with the intent to harass, annoy, threaten, or alarm. If I do that conduct and it again is motivated by hate, it is now aggravated harassment. That is a misdemeanor, and it is essentially a hate crime without being labeled a hate crime. So that is basically the law on hate crime in New York State. Any questions? Okay. Let me reference my notes too. Now that particular, if I remember correctly,
One young person called the other one a fag.
yes, yes. So in that case, yeah, it is confusing, right? So in that particular case, the court found that the child striking the other child and calling him a faggot didn't demonstrate that he was hitting him because he was targeting him because of his sexual orientation. The court found that that was not enough evidence. There would have to be more evidence when someone uses a racial epithet plus they assaulted that person. So, for instance, I can think of an instance if someone is saying going to a gay club, and then they start attacking just the first person that they see, and they're using racial epithets. The location is something you have to consider in addition to the statements during the course of the crime. If there was more than one use of a racial epithet, and that person, we could look back at that person's conduct in community. Say they're on Facebook and they are saying making comments that are derogatory towards a protected class. That could go to the proof if a court allowed us to have a jury hear that, to demonstrate that that was their intent, that was their motive. Other things that courts have looked at is if they have tattoos, their social media presence. We would get search warrants and look at if there's probable cause, to go into their computers to see if they have had any writings, if they're going to websites that are hate-motivated websites. That is what these investigations entail, because as a community, we also have to balance freedom of speech. And just because, unfortunately, when people use poor language or racial epithets, that in and of itself is not a crime.
Piggybacking on that, but if that kid had a sign, a shirt that said "gay and I'm proud,"
Yeah.
then that would be a hate crime, because
The victim, or
The victim.
the victim had a shirt that said "gay" and
I'm gay and
proud.
proud, and then the guy calls him a faggot, then
That
would
could be one factor that would tilt in the
Because the reason why I'm asking that is because my kids start to dated, and they wear, Jewish sweatshirts and stuff like that. So if somebody comes and attacks them like that and calls them,
yes.
Something,
That
you know.
if they're walking at the mall, right, and these two people don't know each other, and they do have something that would identify their religious belief, and then someone just comes right up to them, starts using racial slurs, there's no reason for that interaction. That is something that we would evaluate to determine if we could prove that as a hate crime, and look at all of those factors. It's a fact-driven analysis, like most crimes. And we would have to look at multiple factors. And sometimes they're really close calls, but it's ethical. If we believe that it's the ethical right thing to do, then we leave it in the hands of a grand jury. We leave it in the hands of a judge or a jury to make that determination if we have met our burden beyond a reasonable doubt. There are going to be instances where we do not believe in our evaluation of the evidence it is appropriate to go forward. It's not, Mike Kane has a tough job.
Hey, with that, would you expand on the difference, what police need to make an arrest versus what you need
Yeah.
for a conviction?
Good point. So, this has led to many challenging conversations with law enforcement. Law enforcement's probable cause. We have to prove thank you. Law enforcement, in order to make an arrest, there has to be probable cause. So if we have to put that in like numbers, I would say like 51%, but don't quote me on that. Probable cause is different than beyond a reasonable doubt. So the police may make an arrest, and we may not be consulted in that arrest. That happens often. And when the district attorney evaluates that evidence, there may be insufficient evidence that we think would prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are tough and hard conversations, but we always learn from each other. Any other questions? Yes.
A recent event in Manhattan, a demonstration in front of a synagogue that disrupted synagogue on the Sabbath, was the people doing the destruction claimed they weren't doing it against Jews, but against Zionists. Right? So religions have different characteristics and different sincere beliefs. Jews do. So what if a belief is targeted? They don't say I'm doing it against Jews, I'm doing it against this particular belief.
So then that would, the interpretation would be under if it was the religious belief or perception of religious belief. That's not an easy one.
Synagogue. You just said that synagogues are a place that is going to be treated as hostile.
So a synagogue, if the location is a factor. So for instance, if a synagogue was targeted and there was damage done to it, we would have to be able to prove not only the damage, but that person was motivated to damage it because of hate. And a swastika, for instance, would be strong evidence that that was a hate crime and not just a criminal mischief.
Is a disruption of a religious event a form of harassment?
It could be, yes. Depending on what was said, depending on the actions of the individuals. Another thing that I didn't address, but we also always have to prove that the person sitting in the courtroom is the person that did it. Identity is very difficult to prove, and you would think it would get easier because there are so many mechanisms, social media, that people use, but that actually makes it more difficult. Because I would have to prove, say someone is posting multiple posts of a racially driven language on a religious website. How do I prove? It takes a lot of investigation to prove that the person typing behind that is that person. So that is something that complicates, that modern day evidence helps us in many ways, but also complicates investigations when we have to prove identity.
This might be old school, but is there such a statute as disturbing the peace? If you have a loud, raucous, badly languaged mob shouting hate, isn't that disturbing the peace? Can't that be shut down by police?
Disorderly conduct, yes. I mean, there are instances, yes. I'm trying to think of like a specific example of where the police would be dispersing someone, and if someone wasn't following orders, they could be charged then with disorderly conduct, and generally that always follows with an obstruction or resisting arrest.
So if there is questions that you don't want to raise your hands, if you could slide those cards down to the ends, and then I can read those. But expanding on the last topic, right? So First Amendment, a lot of times there's protections, but then there is also case law underneath that has courts have regularly stated that the police can control the time, place, and manner in which. So there is exceptions to that, but this goes back to everything that has been on these PowerPoints, right? There is things that need to be met, elements that need to be met that are very difficult. So when you see some of these cases, right? Sometimes the police had probable cause to make an arrest, and maybe they didn't do everything that Danielle said, or they weren't able to, with being able to expand it by getting a statement from a suspect or a witness, right? Or they can't prove the elements were motivated by hate, right? But that also is sometimes nothing happens, right? The police are doing nothing, right? When they hear that, and sometimes they are working at trying to, not all the time, sometimes they're trying to, build the case better so the DAs can actually have a prosecutable case. So if there is any cards, if you're not comfortable raising your hands.
Could a political statement or a statement against nationality or against a principle, say the IDF, could that negate a hate crime? For instance, the question about the Zionists, that I'm targeting that, or instead of saying I'm targeting Jews, I'm targeting Israelis. Is that a fine line that has to be proven?
Yeah, it is a very fine line. And then there has to be a crime that associates that language or that conduct. So did that person physically attack someone, assault them, rob them? Did they commit a property crime? Did they damage their property? So there always has to be a specified offense that was motivated by hate.
So protesting is not enough.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Hateful language in and of itself doesn't always rise to a hate crime. Hateful language proves, combined with a crime, would establish that that person's purpose, their objective, was to commit that crime because of hate.
So, let me give you kind of a real-world scenario. Let's say something happens that doesn't quite get to the overt hate crime situation. For example, let's say somebody who is unknown to a synagogue or a church walks in. There's a security officer there. The person wants to go into the service. The security officer thinks the person's going to disrupt the service, stops them. The person pushes the security officer arrests him. Doesn't get to the point where he actually gets inside and does something. How do you think the courts or the district attorney's office would look at something like that?
So once that person made contact, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
No, that was me. So the question, I'm not sure everyone heard it. The question was, if a person entered into a synagogue, the security officer stopped that person, they made physical contact with the security guard, preventing them from going into the service. What could that potentially be? Okay, if I was given that fact pattern, what I would say to law enforcement is, it sounds as if we potentially have, let's start with them entering and security guard says, are you a member here? Has a conversation with them. They aren't, tells them to leave. That could potentially now be a trespass when that person doesn't leave. Now the next conduct, that person touches the security guard when he's telling him to leave or is trying to escort him out. That could be a harassment. Depending on that person's law enforcement title, it potentially could be an obstruction if they're a peace officer and that peace officer has a lawful duty. Now, if in interviewing that person, law enforcement sits down with them, they provide them with their quote-unquote their Miranda rights, and they elect to speak to law enforcement, and he explains that his purpose was to go in there and it was to harm someone, we would now have to evaluate, is that potentially a hate crime? It didn't happen, so what is the crime? But the pushing of the security guard, the trespass, that would be a crime in and of itself, depending on what he has to say, if there was electronic evidence, if we could establish that his conduct was motivated by hate and there was a specified offense that is in the hate crime statute, it may be elevated. Off the top of my head, I know obstruction is not. Some trespasses are. And if that individual said something that would then be admissible in court, we would have to evaluate if there was an attempt of some type of hate crime because they were motivated by hate. Does that make sense? That's how I'm breaking it down in my mind.
I'm just looking at it as if it actually stops with the officer preventing the crime from actually taking place. And I think what I'm hearing is, unless the perpetrator actually did something overt to cause the court to think, or your office to think, that it was hate motivated, that it's going to be the initial crimes, but there's not going to be an...
That's correct. That's correct. It would be tricky. That's the best case scenario. Well, best case scenario is it didn't happen, right? The person doesn't come in. But if it is prevented, so now let's talk about what I would instruct an ADA that had that fact pattern. If we couldn't get ourselves to an enhancement of a hate crime, but we understand that that was that person's intended purpose, they just got dangerously close. We would want to talk and tell the judge this. In trying to resolve this case or post accountability if that person pleads guilty to an offense or is found guilty of an offense, we would want the judge to consider that in the punishment. That's very different than someone pushing a security guard, not to minimize that experience and that crime, but if they're doing it in this context, a judge needs to know that so that a judge can consider that when it comes to what are the collateral consequences to that person. That is how we advocate, or should be advocating. I train my ADAs that way. Yes?
I have a two-part question. So I'm looking at the aggravated harassment first degree thing that you put up there. I'm trying to figure out exactly what that encompasses. So like if individuals went into a privately owned business and were asked to leave because they were saying racist or protected class language, harassment kind of language, and they refused to leave, when the person asked them to leave. And they were saying disrupting the business and being aggressive with the protective class person. And the police responded and didn't do anything but make the person leave. I would think that would be an aggravated harassment.
It potentially can be, because there's two parts to the aggravated harassment. There is the first part that has to deal with damage to property, so that would be swastikas specifically on that person's property, and there's damage. And then the second part is, did that person intend to harass, annoy, threaten, or alarm that person, and were motivated by hate? That is something that it is. In fairness to law enforcement, they may not know. That would be something that they.
Just the follow-up. So, first of all, damages. Damages is a big definition. If you harass somebody in a building that's working, and you cause problems to the people that's sitting in that place, and the business loses customers, people are afraid to come, on top of the fact that the guy or the person is saying stuff that I'm not gonna repeat, and screaming bloody murder, and calling you names and spitting on you. And then there is another question, are you allowed to get him out of there physically, or wait to the police, which you don't know what this guy's gonna do after everything he said, and then when the police comes, I don't even know if the policeman is educated in the law. Because from our experience, it's not.
So
And just to have him leave, what did that do? He's gonna go somewhere else to do the same thing.
So, first part of your question with respect to damages. In a criminal context, that has to be physical damage. Like, I broke a window and it cost me $250 to replace it. The emotional impact or the loss of business, that is not something that when someone is charged with an offense that a criminal judge can, they could take it into consideration, but they can't order damages. They can't say, okay, you lost this amount of business, I'm going to repay you in this amount. That's a civil lawsuit. Second part of what you're saying, with respect to that particular incident, what I can tell you is that I would recommend is that you go to that police agency and you file another report and you ask to speak to a supervisor. And I'll give you my card and we can have a conversation. There are instances, as I described, that the district attorney's office evaluates crimes that are not charged. And I'll give you my business card, or you could go to the Amherst Police Department. I'd be happy to speak with them if that's where this occurred, and we can evaluate it.
We've done all of this. I'm not looking to go to make it into a bigger deal. I'm just saying that when somebody comes with intent, he's capable of doing stuff that it's going to happen in a split of a second. It's not going to happen if the police will come or not. He's going to decide on the spot what to do because he's losing control. So when you're, as a policeman, if you come in and you're aware of this, you can't say, let him go. He left the promises because we came, so he should go. I just don't get, I don't understand it. It's like, this is, even if he doesn't seem dangerous, even if he's just a normal person, in hate and in terrorism and in violence, it happens in a split of a second.
And sometimes those decisions are tough for police officers right on the scene. And it's very important to provide them with all of the evidence. It's very important to follow up with those reports and provide them with video evidence that this guy's been here on numerous occasions. He's conducted himself on multiple, I've had to ask him to leave. That is going to change the analysis as to whether or not that conduct rises to the level of a criminal offense. So that's what I think that it's, I can understand reservation and not reporting it. It feels as if it may make it worse. I think the best thing that we can do, and that's something that Mr. Macy and I tried doing when he was working with BPD, is making community members feel confident in providing this information to us. And we will do. And there's many instances, and the law allows us to be able to protect people as much as we can. Their identity from the accused, knowing who they are. And judges will help us with that with protective orders. We have to do that in our very serious offenses to protect victims of crime, but they also have the right to confront those that are accusing them. And the judge will protect that person's identity up until it is equitable and fair to the accused. Any other? Yes.
I'd like to know about a situation that really is about intimidation. A neighborhood that is a Jewish neighborhood. People, in this case men, 2 by 2, going up someone's walkway in that neighborhood, place to place, to see whether or not there's a mezuzah on the door, taking a photograph, writing down a name, doing no harm, but leaving. What does one do about that?
As a human, we know that that is, we know from human experience that is concerning conduct. The police would then would have to develop an investigation to determine if that was in fact that person's intent, because the behavior appears to be innocuous in and of itself, but it would require a significant amount of investigation to be able to establish that that is what that person is doing. So from a practical standpoint, what do we do? What you're telling me right now, in what I know of the law, that does not seem to be sufficient to charge someone with an offense. What I think that we need to do as community members is share that information with law enforcement and make them aware so that there can be a evaluation and that you could put trespass signs on your property. I think that in today's world, unfortunately, we have to have cameras. Everyone needs to have cameras. That helps for the police and for us to be able to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. Because it's not just, you can prove a case with a single witness. That's it. One person can come into court and say, Johnny Smith took my property, punched me in the face, demanded my property, and took my property. That would be enough for a judge or a jury. That's what the criminal jury instruction will say. But as humans, we want more, right? Beyond a reasonable doubt means more to most people, even though we can instruct a jury. What supports what someone has to say? If there's video surveillance, if there's additional people that saw that conduct, that corroborates or supports what that person saw happen. So I think that's what we can do as community members to keep ourselves vigilant and safe, is have cameras and let law enforcement. I'm not sure if Amherst has the same program that Buffalo has, where you can register your Ring cameras with law enforcement so that if there's a crime in the area, they know they can knock on your door and you'll share that evidence with them. Now, there's ways that the law allows us to, where you could share that video evidence and we don't have to list you as a witness. A lot of people don't want to be involved, but they want to be able to protect their community. There are mechanisms that we can, at times, to keep homeowners that have surveillance that has nothing to do with them, but may have captured a crime. There's ways that we can protect you, like I said, up until a judge tells us we have to turn over that identification. Does that answer your question?
So in that particular instance, if all the neighbors were experiencing the same issue, they couldn't call the police and say, we have this potential trespasser?
No, I think you should. I think that you should, and I think that under the right circumstances, law enforcement may have an objective, credible reason to engage with that person, to ask them questions as to the purpose that they are there. That's a tricky one. It's super tricky because maybe the person is just curious, but human experience tells us there appears to be more from that conduct. But I would encourage you, and if there's more than one person that is having the same experience, and say that person is coming, you see him on a Monday, then you see him on a Tuesday, and it's odd. And someone maybe, hey, what's your name? What are you doing here? What does that interaction look like with that civilian? I don't think there's any harm in making the police aware of it and documenting it. I think you're strongest in numbers.
Question. So I would just wonder, from this perspective of education, because you said, like, in a case like this, what happened, is you're saying the police, first of all, I live in Amherst. The Amherst police is incredible, really supportive. So just the mannerism, incredible police. But I feel like there's a missing part because the definition has changed, especially after October 7th. The definition of anti-Semitism has changed. There's different words that people are using to harass Jews in the community. And I feel like we have to explain because the local police or people in general, there's another term called imported anti-Semitism. We can't ignore the fact that there's a lot of immigrants in our communities. They come from countries where, for example, Mein Kampf is being sold in every market, in every, there's a lot of proof that, and then they come here, and then, for example, my girls, I can give you a lot of examples. I'm involved in this organization who takes notes, but you have kids in Sweet Home that say, sorry, your son can't play with my kid. He's a first grader because you're Jewish. My daughter goes to Amherst. There's a wonderful Muslim friend. Her dad says, no, she can't play with your daughter anymore because you're Jewish. Or someone posted, the world will be a better place if Israel was wiped off the map. Or someone calls out, oh, if you're a Zionist, show your face. So we are not only Jews now, we are Zionists. And if you're pro, Zionism or pro-Israel, people discriminate. Like someone puts a flag, all of a sudden their car is scratched. How do we, there's a place here for education, I think. And if the local police doesn't understand the culture, doesn't understand, I feel that a lot of the times, like need to be in a defensive manner, like something like that is happening, someone is coming into your business and harasses you and threaten, and my family is from a background from an Arab family. I'm Jewish from an Arab family. And so how do we explain it here? Because the definition has changed.
I think the best thing would, just how you explained it to me, building that relationship with the Amherst Police Department, inviting them into your community, explaining to them these are some of our experiences. And yeah, they may not rise to a level of a crime. If a parent says, you can't play with my child because of your religious belief, that doesn't become a crime, but that doesn't mean that the conversation should end. I think it is talking to law enforcement, educating them about their experiences. Something that we did in Buffalo a lot is the chiefs in each district would have community meetings, and they would keep their doors open, and they have community police officers that community members would come and describe those experiences, and that helped the brass or those that were in charge to inform those that are responding to these calls about what is happening in their particular community. So if it's sitting down and having a cup of coffee with the lieutenant at Amherst Police Department or the lieutenant of detectives or asking the chief of police to come here, I think those are opportunities to make them aware of what you are experiencing, that there could be hesitation to contact police because it's not a crime, but it could lead to one, and it's making it uncomfortable for you in community. I think that is the benefit of everybody working together, law enforcement, the district attorney's office, is just having those conversations. And it informs the way that they may look at a situation when they're responding to it now that they're educated. I can't speak for the Amherst Police Department. They may be very angry with me.
I can pass that along. I'm a current town board member in Amherst. And we do a lot of training on different topics with the police. And I can share that with the chief, that that's something that people would be interested in doing and try and get it going.
So this is a perfect segue back into Secure Jewish Buffalo, right? So
But I am on the committee that formed Secure Jewish Buffalo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a regular partner, a liaison with the Jewish Federation, right, from Amherst Police, who I talk to somewhat regularly. However, if somebody is not calling the police, right, to let them know what's going on, they're not going to know. Another avenue you can do all the time, I will give everybody my cell phone number in a minute so you can prep your phones, right? You can call me and I can call them, right? So there is a captain, there is a lieutenant, there's other people that will absolutely reach out. Same thing with Buffalo, right? There is a lieutenant who does all the intel stuff. Back to that suspicious behavior, that gives the police possibly probable cause to stop somebody and talk to them if they're continuously doing that in somebody's neighborhood, right? Back to the store, sorry that happened. Maybe there is a loss in information from the time that the police get there, right? And sometimes that happens. Hey, I think I'm pretty clear on the call. Then there is a dispatcher that gives them, hey, there is an unwelcome guest, right? That's not how this happened, right? I said all of this. The tape might be something different, but here's the other side. The police absolutely need a complaint, right? If you are saying, hey, and I'm not saying that this is
I
the
think you're
case.
misunderstanding. The police came on a 911 call.
Yep,
3 squads.
yep,
Okay, one took me, one took the gentleman.
yep.
They did the whole thing. Told us
Understand.
it's nothing. Then we called the bosses.
Yep,
Then we had a 2-hour conversation with them, and then it was
Nothing.
nothing.
okay,
So we did the whole thing the right way,
yep,
and there's nothing missing here. It's all about the individual that came and received the call, understanding what is actually happening.
yep.
What is he saying? How is he behaving? What's his motive?
The words he's saying.
The words he's saying. And
So,
I understand what he's saying in 4 different languages.
yep.
So,
So sometimes the police drop the ball, right? However, there is also sometimes that there is an information gap, right? And I'm not saying that that's what happened this time. I'm saying generally, in the time in the police department or even here, right? We recently had a sit down with a captain from the Kenmore Police and a community member who felt that the police didn't do something. We were able to have the body cam reviewed. We were able to listen to the call. We were able to do all this with the community member. And there was absolutely a very big disconnect between what was believed to have happened to what the police had, and then ultimately what the police did, right? So again, I'm not saying that happens in your case. I'm saying that does happen sometimes, and you're welcome to call me when that does happen, right? And either from my professional experience before or now, we have people on a Rolodex. That's the whole point of the job, right? Patty?
I was hearing that story. Is it also, I mean, is that disconnect or that lack of communication also because, is it a lack of education on the police's part of where the line is drawn between a slur and a threat?
It could be, right? So that's absolutely possible, right? Then sometimes they look at, is there a complainant? Is somebody willing to press the charges and go forward with this? Is somebody else saying something, like, do they not have any information? Back to Danielle's, is this just one person versus the other person's, but there's really no other evidence and it's a very low level crime? Sometimes you do get that result, but that's where the cameras really come in and it's priceless, right? Hey, no, this is what I'm saying. And again, I'm not saying that that's what happened in your case. I just know that sometimes if 2 people call or one person calls and the other person, no, he said this, and then it's very difficult to deal with the information that you have. But again, you're welcome to give me a call and I will get all of that information. Body cam, there's a retention time on body cam. The city of Buffalo, it used to be 6 months, now it's like 3 years, I think. Other places have it even longer than that. So all of that stuff can be reviewed if there is an issue.
But I think the really tricky thing, obviously this gentleman perceived this person as a threat. but then he was dismissed.
At the bare minimum, it
And
sounds
how do
like.
you, if someone perceives something as a threat, how can you say it's nothing because they perceive it as a threat?
Sure. So,
I'm not trying
So
to
it-
be difficult, I'm just trying to understand.
So when it comes to violations, for instance, if a police officer does not observe that violation, they can't make a summary arrest right then and there.
Okay.
So so in an instance where maybe it is not a hate crime, but it was a violation, that person came in with the intent to harass, annoy, threaten, or alarm, then you would have to file a complaint. That complaint would then have to be filed with the local court, and that person would then have to be charged with a violation harassment. Sometimes that's what these things look like, but unless a police officer is right then and there seeing it, he can't go and pick up that person and arrest them for violation level offenses. For crimes, that's different.
But if there were witnesses at the time, that would also change
yes.
the
It would make a
circumstance.
case stronger. Anytime you have witnesses that could corroborate what the victim of that crime, that would make a case stronger. Doesn't mean that it now becomes a crime, it doesn't become a misdemeanor or a felony. It may just unfortunately be a violation. A violation offense is essentially like a parking ticket, but it has like a criminal tone to it. You could get an order of protection. The most you could do is 15 days in jail. In 15 years, I've never seen anyone sentenced on a violation to any time in a local incarceration. I don't
So is
think
it his responsibility to get the witnesses in the restaurant to
well, if they're willing
document,
to. That
or
would be law
is it,
enforcement,
or
really
the
law.
law, if the law enforcement officer says it's nothing and then doesn't,
It should be on the police.
Yes.
Okay.
Right?
But
So,
Yeah.
it sounds like the police officer interpreted it himself and just left.
it's possible.
It's possible.
So what do you do? It's a hate crime.
You're welcome to call me, and we will call the Amherst Police, or I will facilitate that meeting.
Your number?
And
Right.
I'm happy to evaluate it too. So Craig will get that information, share it with me, and then I will.
So, my number, right, so my personal cell phone number is 716-602-1777. Send me a text because everybody is trying to sell me car insurance. My Easy Pass is apparently like $6,000 overdue. So all of those types of things.
602,
1777.
so 1777.
Yes, yes. So I work for the Buffalo Jewish Federation, Director of Community Security, right? And then with Secure Jewish Buffalo, we are actively partnering regularly with law enforcement. I share your opinion on Amherst Police. I live in the town. They've always been great. They're at the schools. So and they're very responsive when we call, right, about stuff.
Thank you.
So, second, or maybe kind of wrapping this up, FBI Buffalo sent some analysts here. The supervisor wasn't able to come. We also have a very good partnership with them. Their white collar squad has 12 agents, and then they have support staff. That squad also deals with civil rights crimes, which ends up being hate crimes, right? And that would be the federal nexus. That would be the group, if there is a federal nexus, that would be taking care of those crimes, right? Either them or JTTF, which would need an ideology. But they're also a very valid, valuable, trusted partner for us and the whole community. So I wanted to thank them. So is there anything, we're going over on time, but this is great that people are talking and trying to, ma'am.
Is there any reason you deal so well with the FBI? Why are we only seeing statistics from 2015?
Yeah.
We know that the statistics blew up after October 7th. Where are those stats?
You're very right. That is an error. So 2024's numbers, right? I can tell you off the top of my head, 67% of religious-based hate crimes are targeted at Jewish people in the Jewish community, right? So that is out there. That's a very big number, right? Which is why you get resources from the federal government or the DA's office or law enforcement when we ask, right? We try to be very selective when we ask because, hey, we know that they have other jobs and other responsibilities, but they are also very responsive because of that, right? So that is a very valid point, and that is out there. But so yeah, and you can look up, and even if you look up, I think NYPD's numbers came out, and they're at like 54 or 56%. Don't quote me. Hate crimes related to Jewish victims, right? So very high numbers. But it goes back to awareness and reporting, right? So when we look at reporting, I'll tell you just 2 more minutes of your time. So when something does happen, right, there's multiple people in the Federation that you can call, right? Lauren deals with the schools. If there is something that happens, she usually gets an alert. I get an alert, right, or a text or a call. We then share that information with partners that we guarantee are going to be able to document that. Then we keep a record internally on a spreadsheet. We do an incident report, so we can always keep track of this. Whether it is a convicted hate crime or we have an offender or not, we have the ability to keep track internally, right? That goes to ADL. We make a point to send that to ADL, who also is very good at keeping stats, right? And then we send it to 2 different civilian analyst security partners, Secure Community Network, which is SCN, and then CSI out of New York City, right? And they have the ability to do workups and things like that on hate crime related offenses specifically for the Jewish community, right? So again, if you guys need my number one more time, it's 716-602-1777. And again, you're welcome to hit me up with a text, no problem, or a call. Yeah. Hi.
Buffalo over here. If you have anything that you want to share or post or spread, if you go to FBI.gov, we have a tips and IC3. We recommend filling that out, putting your phone numbers in there so we can give you a call. You can also call us if you Google FBI Buffalo. We do have a number where you can call. I recommend doing our.
Here, I'll bring it to her.
Okay. Ooh. The statistics are up, so he did go over that. That was great. For FBI Buffalo's point in, if you want to reach out to us to share what's going on or if something occurred, go to FBI.gov. We have an IC3 site as well as tips, and you could apply both there. We recommend leaving your name, phone number. It's a lot easier than calling just FBI Buffalo's generic number, because then we get all your stuff and we can call you back, get someone to handle that and be specifically designated to what's going on in your realm of what occurred. Nicolette Smani. I'm on white collar, and I was also with the JTTF at Buffalo. So going through both aspects, it was very interesting to hear a variety of the concerns you guys shared. Please continue to grow this. This was great. So.
Want to say anything in closing? Okay. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.